The Gift of the Magi by O. Henry. $1.87. That was all. She had put it aside 1 cent and then another and then another in her careful buying of meat and other food. Della counted it 3 times. $1.87. The next day would be Christmas. There was nothing to do but fall on the bed and cry, so Della did. While the lady of the home is slowly growing quieter, we can look at the home. Furnished rooms at a cost of $8 a week. In the hall below was a letterbox too small to hold the letter. There was an electric bell, but it didn't make a sound. There was a name beside the door, Mr. James Dillingham Young. When the name was placed there, Mr. James Dillingham Young was being paid $30 a week. Now he's only getting paid $20. The name seemed long and important. It should have been Mr. James D. Young. But then when Mr. James Dillingham Young entered the furnished rooms, his name became very short indeed. Mrs. James Dillingham Young put her arms warmly around him and called him Jim. You've already met her. She's Della. Della finished her crying and cleaning the marks off her face. She stood by the window and looked out with no interest. Tomorrow would be Christmas Day. She had only $1.87 to buy Jim a gift. She had put aside as much as she could for months. $20 a week is not enough. Everything had cost more than she expected, only $1.87 to buy a gift for Jim. She had many happy hours planning something nice for him, something nearly good enough, something almost worth of belonging to Jim. There was a looking glass between the windows of the room. Maybe you've seen the kind of looking glass that is placed in $8 furnished rooms. It was very narrow. A person could only see a little of himself at a time. However, if it was thin and moved very quickly, he might be able to get a good view of himself. Della, being quite thin, had mastered this art. Suddenly, she turned from the window and stood before the glass. Her eyes were shining brightly, but her face had lost its color. Quickly, she pulled down her hair and let it fall to its complete length. The James Dillingham Young were very proud of the 2 things they owned. One thing was James' watch. It had once belonged to his father and long ago belonged to his father's father. The other thing was Della's hair. If the queen had lived in the rooms near theirs, Della would have washed and dried her hair, where the queens would see it. Della knew her hair was more beautiful than any queen's jewels and gifts. If a king had lived in the same house with all his riches, Jim would have looked at his watch every time they met. Jim knew that no king had anything so valuable. Now Della's beautiful hair fell about her, shining like a falling stream of brown water. It reached below her knee, and then she quickly and nervously put it back up on her head. Once she stopped for a moment and stood still, a tear or 2 ran down her face. She put on her old brown coat and her old brown hat. With the bright light still in her eyes, she moved quickly out the door and down the street. When she stopped, the sign said Mrs. Sofroni's hair articles of all kinds. Up to the 2nd floor, Della ran and stopped to get her breath. Mrs. Sofroni looked at her. Will you buy my hair? Asked Della. I buy hair. Take your hat off and let me take a look, said Mr. Sofroni. Down fell the brown waterfall. $20, said Mrs. Sofroni, lifting the hair to feel its weight. Give it to me quick, said Della. The next 2 hours seemed to fly. She was going from one shop to another to find a gift for Jim. She found it at last. There was nothing like it in any other shop in the city. It was a gold watch chain. Its value was rich and pure material. Because it was so plain and simple, it was good enough for Jim's watch. As soon as she saw it, she knew that Jim must have it. It was just like him, quietness and value. She paid $21. She hurried home with the chain and 87 cents. With that chain on his watch, Jim looked at his watch and learned the time anywhere he might be. Though the watch was so fine, it had never had a fine chain. When Della arrived home, her mind went quiet a little. She began to think more reasonably. She tried to cover the sad marks of what she had done. Love and large-hearted giving. When added together, she can leave deep marks. It's never easy to cover these marks. Within 40 minutes, her head looked a little better. With her short hair, she looked a little like a schoolboy. She stood at the looking glass for a long time. If Jim doesn't kill me, she said to herself, before he looks at me a second time, he'll say I look like a girl who sings and dances for money. At 7, Jim's dinner was ready for him. Jim was never late. Della held the watch chain in her hand and sat near the door where he always entered. Then she heard his steps in the hall, and her face lost color for a moment. She often said little prayers quietly and about simple everyday things, and now she said, please God, make him think I'm still pretty. The door opened and Jim stepped in. He looked very thin and was not smiling. Poor fellow. He was only 22 and with a family to take care of. He needed a new coat and had nothing to cover his cold hands with. Jim stepped into the door. He was as quiet as hunting a dog when near a bird. His eyes looked strangely at Della, and there was an expression in them that she could not understand. It filled her with fear. It was not anger nor surprise, not anything she had been ready for. He simply looked at her with a strange expression on his face. Della went to him. "Jim, dear," she cried, "don't look at me like that. I had my hair cut off and sold it. I couldn't live through Christmas without giving you a gift. My hair will grow again. You won't care, will you? My hair grows very fast. It's Christmas, Jim. Let's be happy. You don't know what a nice, beautiful gift I got you." "You've cut your hair?" asked Jim, slowly. He seemed to labor to understand what happened. "Cut it off and sold it, Della. Don't you like me now? I'm the same without my hair." Jim looked around the room. "You say your hair is gone," he said. "You don't have to look for it. I said it's sold. I tell you, sold and gone. It's the night before Christmas. Be good to me because I sold it for you. Maybe the hairs off my head could be counted," she said, "but no one can ever count my love for you. Shall we eat dinner?" Jim put his arms around Della. "For 10 seconds, let's look in another direction. $8 a week or $1 million a year? How different are they? Someone may give you an answer, but it'll be wrong." The Magi bought valuable gifts, but that was not among them. My meaning will explain soon. From inside the coat, Jim took something out on paper. He threw it upon the table. "I want you to understand me, Della," he said. "Nothing like a haircut can make me love you any less, but if you open that, you may know what I felt when I came in." White fingers pulled up paper, and then cried of joy, and then a time changed to tears. For there lie the combs that Della looked in a shop window for a long time. Beautiful combs with jewels perfect for her beautiful hair. She had known they cost too much for her to buy. She had looked at them without the least hope of owning them, and now they were hers. But her hair was gone, but she held them to her heart and was able to say, "My hair grows fast, Jim." And then she jumped up and cried. Jim had not yet seen his beautiful gift. She held it out to him and opened her hand. The gold seemed to shine softly as if it was her own warm, loving spirit. "Isn't it perfect, Jim? I hunted all over town to find it. You'll have to look at your watch 100 times a day now. Give me your watch. I want to see how they look together." Jim sat down and smiled. Della said, "Let's put our Christmas gifts away for a while. They're too nice to use now. I sold the watch to get the money to buy the combs, and now I think we should have our dinner." The Magi, as you know, were wise men who bought gifts for the newborn Christ child. They were the first to give Christmas gifts. Being wise, their gifts were doubtless wise ones, and I have told the story of the two children who were not wise. Each sold the most valuable thing they owned in order to buy a gift or the other. But let me speak on the last word to the wise of these days. Of all who give gifts, these two were the most wise. Of all who give and receive gifts, such as they are the most wise. Everywhere they are now wise ones. They are the Magi.